Hello and welcome to another episode of Teaching Heroes, the teaching podcast where I ask teachers and educators, what does it take to turn up every day and teach tomorrow's leaders? And today I have two very special guests. I have the dynamic team who are part of the program website. We're going to hear all about it, Truwell. So we have Adam Weber and Timothy Hawks on. Guys, thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Absolute pleasure, Joe. Great to be with you.
And so teacher health and wellbeing is kind of a new area for me that I've started to get really interested in. So it was awesome to connect with both of you on LinkedIn and to hear more about your project and what you guys and the impact you're having in that space. So we've got lots to talk about and lots of questions I have for you. But let's start at the beginning. Tim, tell us, who you are. How did you start your career in education?
Oh, very briefly, Joe, the full catastrophe is Dr. Tim Hawks, and if you want the whole rest of it, it's OAM and all the rest of it. But look, the real thing is that I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, and I've got an educator's heart, and I've led schools for nearly 4 decades now, and or been involved with schools and schooling. I was the head of St Leonard's College down in Melbourne, great school, co-ed school, and I was the head of the King's School here in Sydney for nearly 2 decades. And so that's been my life, that's been my passion, that's been my interest. And during that time, I've also authored a dozen or so books, a lot of it on well-being and indeed the raising of children and the educating of children. And I've done a fair bit of media work on Q&A but particularly with Richard Glover on Drive Time.
Yeah, one of my favourites, I have to
say.
I
had a lot of fun with Richard on Drive Time, and he'll put me on political forums. So that just tells you something, isn't it, of the political element of that. There is an education, but I did that for about 10 years, but now, and I still do a little bit of media work, but for the most part, I'm working with Adam, which is, may I just say, an absolute privilege. This is a really gifted friend and colleague who has been working in edtech startups, and our passion for both of us is now in the well-being both of teachers and of students. And so I'll let Adam tell his story.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much for that, Tim. So my story is a little bit different than Tim's. My first school, I was teaching in China because I did my teaching degree at USQ, and you've got to finish all your courses before you can get your blue card in Queensland. So I used it as an excuse to go to China, and I learned I'm not very Confucian.
Right. Okay.
I learned a lot about working in China, and yes, so I came back to Sydney, and I taught out a number of schools in Western Sydney, and unfortunately, the approach that new teachers receive is this trial by fire. The first school that I taught at in Australia, in Sydney, was a very challenging school. It was essentially the students' last stop before they went into juvenile detention. I think that's the right terminology. Very much thrown into the deep end, and I stayed in the deep end trying to swim or trying to stay afloat, but just over time, that stress, that lack of focusing on teacher well-being really impacted myself until after 3 years of being a teacher, I left teaching, and just this trial by fire approach, and that's something that we Tim and we speak to a number of educators, school leaders about as well. And even though they try and assist new teachers just have, I guess, been drilled that you can't make mistakes. You've got to be perfect in your first year. You shouldn't be making mistakes. You've got an A on your essay in managing a difficult class. That means you should be able to manage a difficult class. But we know that's not true. And so I think there's got to be that shift that hasn't yet happened, where new teachers are a lot more supported and their well-being is protected, and they're provided with the tools. So I met Tim through a mutual friend, and he was my executive coach for a year. And I've got to say, it's been an absolute pleasure working with Tim. He is incredible. The content, when I read the first course that we worked together on, The Tricks to Remaining Positive, I was just blown away with what he had written. And I knew that if I had gone through a course or even read what he wrote when I was a teacher, my well-being would have been different. I would have had some of those skills that you need to protect your well-being. So one course has now led to 60 courses.
What was that, Tim?
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Tim?
Oh, well, Adam is very, very, very kind, but it is interesting, Joe. What happened was that we decided one day that we would that we would try and do something about this issue that Adam picked up on teacher burnout, and because in the first 5 years of them being in the profession, Joe, and that's a very ugly statistic. That's a waste.
What was that statistic again? 30%.
Yeah, about 30% of our teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years of teaching. And as you would know, with the terrific work that you guys are doing at ACU there, Joe, that represents the loss, quite literally, of many, many billions of dollars to the Australian economy. I don't know if do you have any figures of the teachers and those that you train there at ACU leaving the profession, prematurely, Joe?
Yeah, I think we just work off that 30% too. But you stuck me, Tim. I'll have to go back and look at the figure. But the startling, we had a real startling figure as well about how early students leave the degrees as well, the teaching degrees.
Yeah, you're quite
and it's
right.
not just ACU, but it is something high, like 20%, or it's quite a high figure as well.
And these are ugly figures, Joe. It's not just that, but we're finding, for example, that in some measures that teachers are making more work cover claims than literally any other profession. And much of this is related to mental health issues, not entirely, but a lot of it is. And we also are finding that with all the various measures of teacher well-being, that, and this is even pre-COVID, Joe, pre-COVID, we had measures of between 60 to 70% of teachers registering unacceptable levels of stress. So look, and then you add in the COVID scenario, and of course that figure is only going to go northward. I might just quietly say that even with students, we're getting 1 in 7 students at secondary level currently registering unacceptable levels of mental well-being. And sorry, that's 1 in 4 at secondary level and 1 in 7 at primary level. Now, that's a scary thing. And of course, as you would know, Joe, because we've got the educator's heart there, that if your students aren't travelling well, the teachers aren't going to be travelling well. They're going to be stressed. They're going to be called upon to try and intercede and to help them.
Yeah.
And look, for that reason, Adam and I decided we would set up Truwell, and I'll get Adam to explain a little bit more about Truwell in a second, but I'll just tell you that Truwell, it's called Truwell because it stood for Teachers Are You Well?
Yeah, right. Nice.
And of course, as soon as we got onto that and we started doing all sorts of programs for teachers, which I'll get Adam to describe in a second, we got the phone calls coming through, Joe, saying, hey, Adam, hey, Tim, love your program, but can you do the same thing for students? And so now Truwell is now a whole of school wellbeing program, and it covers both teachers, Joe, and also support staff. And isn't that important? They're often the forgotten ones, in this in education, and my heart goes out to them. Without the support staff that I experienced both at St Leonard's and at King's and in my various other schools I've been at, I would have been absolutely dead and buried. They made me look a lot better than I am, trust me.
Yeah, that's right. I always say to my students, they're the ones that you want to show the most love to. It's the office ladies and the office people and the support staff, because they're the kind of, as you say, the heartbeat of the school. But I think you raise an interesting point there about, teacher health and student health, because it's a bit like, what the chicken and the egg scenario, like which comes first. But I mean, what I know though is that if a teacher isn't mentally and physically well in themselves, then the likelihood that they're going to be able to manage the complex needs and the increasing expectations we have of teachers in the society, you know, they're not going to have the impact on the students' health and well-being that they, you know, want to have if they're not themselves, you know, able to, manage all the things that are going on for them.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Adam, I'd be interested in your views. I mean, the link between teacher well-being and student well-being, how do you call it?
Well, I mean, right now, most platforms, wellbeing programs, most wellbeing platforms are focused on this surveying. They think that all it takes is this data-centric approach. If we ask our teachers every week how they're going, that magically things will be fixed. Right now, we're just seeing, I think we're seeing this data fatigue that is going to be creeping in, and we've got to do more than just monitoring. And while monitoring is very important, capturing teacher voice, it's got to be backed up with building a fence at the top of the wellbeing cliff, and that's something that Tim and I have really worked hard on doing with Truwell. You know, I'm a cynical teacher. The only time that I did a wellbeing survey, I was very, very cynical. I went, well, we know one time out of 3 years I did a survey, and I was like, I know this is they're ticking a box here. I know there's not going to much happen. And so you've got a cynical teacher now building a teacher wellbeing, a school wellbeing platform. And I think that's what you need. You need to move away from these education technologists, these social demographers that love surveys, that will sit down and do a 20-minute survey and go, wow, that was exciting. We've got to, you know, ensure that this is something that teachers are going to adopt, something they're going to be excited about. And that's what we've really focused on with Truwell, is looking at this bigger picture, but also really focusing on how can we protect our teachers, our support staff, and enrich their well-being. And oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, be great because this has come out of your experience as a beginning teacher. You know, would you be able to talk a little bit more about that? You know, so in retrospect, because you know, at the time, you know, and I experienced it too. You know, the impact that you think you're going to have doesn't quite match the reality, and the expectations that you have from parents, and you know, the community, and that's definitely increased since I've been in schools. You know, so, you know, at the time it can feel so overwhelming, but in retrospect and with all the knowledge that you know now, what was it that was missing in the environment that, I mean, you could talk a bit about your experience and then what you actually think was missing, or what would have made the difference?
I think there's two key things that we're really missing, and us, in my opinion, still missing in many schools, and that's capturing teacher voice, asking teachers what are their suggestions to improving their well-being, because those suggestions are being discussed. Okay, they're being discussed in the staff room, and it's just, I guess it's boiling over into some of these issues that become bigger. You know, staff are talking about things, teachers you know, saying, oh, well, this has been a real big issue, and it's just not getting back to leadership. And because that there's a lot of communication in the staff room, but it's not getting to the leadership, there becomes a lot of cynicism, in my opinion. And that's why we need to capture teacher voice, and we need to do it in a way that's not overwhelming. We don't need to ask every single week. You know, Tim and I, we think it's once a term. Once a term is great, because it actually allows the leadership team to focus on what are those changes they're going to make. They're not going to get overwhelmed with data. So we think it starts with teacher voice. If schools ask once a term, what suggestions do you have? We think that's, and from our own studies, that's just a huge game changer. It just decreases that cynicism. It increases that communication between leadership. And the second thing is, it's just actually doing well-being courses. I was using sayings, expressions from Disney, you know, Hakuna Matata to get through the day. You know, no worries.
I love
I'm not
Disney so
sing.
much, Adam. So now I like you even more. Hakuna Matata.
Yeah. I just hadn't completed any well-being training, any mental health. So all I was essentially doing is a combination of Bob Marley and Disney to get through the day, and thinking, well, you know, just no worries, just get through it. You know, and that just doesn't work. That can work for some point, but it's still not protecting your well-being. And I think we need to get those positive psychology courses. We need to get teachers understanding how to what burnout is. I didn't even know what burnout was. It was only until I couldn't keep up with this ridiculous workload, to be honest. Yeah.
It's interesting what Adam says, Joe, because I mean, we've looked at all the various wellbeing packages that are out there, and Adam's put his finger right on the point of one of the, I think, fundamental weaknesses. But firstly, I want to acknowledge a fundamental strength in many of them, and that is that they do the survey. Now, the surveys, look, are important. You've actually got to take the temperature of your teachers and indeed of your students. And indeed, if that temperature is inappropriate, then to be able to direct them to help agencies and to give them advice. And we do that at Truwell. So that we do that survey. But Adam's actually put his finger on the most extraordinary thing that seems to go missing with many of these is, hey, have you got any ideas as to how the skill can help you? You know, and it's such a blindingly obvious question, it seems to me. And yet so many of these surveys don't actually ask that. And and Adam is right. I love that phrase he used about giving a teacher their voice. And we do the same thing with students. You know, have you got any ideas, students, you know, as to how the school can help you with your well-being? The other thing we do with the Truwell program is that we actually map the relative impacts upon, or if you like, the stresses upon the lives of teachers and indeed of students. And so we know from our research, and you guys there at ACU have done some amazing research in this space too, in teacher well-being. And as you would know, Joe, the major stresses in this space are things like workload, things like there are relational issues, there are work-life balance issues, there are things like career burnout issues, managing difficult class, massive student rights issues that impact parenting styles, that make teaching of their children difficult. I mean, these are the issues with students. We're looking at bullying. You're looking at the impact of social media. You're looking at the issues like sexual consent and a whole range of these sorts of things. So there's another raft of issues. Now, we know what those stresses are. And so we actually asked teachers, hey, how significant are these 12 major stresses in your life, or 10 major stresses in your life? And that is really, really exciting, because that gives us a massive diagnostic.
Yep, he's paused.
Oh, okay. It's not my internet.
These are the things that are causing the toes to curl on your staff, you know. So therefore they can then go, and as Adam said, to the next stage. It's no good just saying this is the problem. You've got to try and deal with it. And that's why we at Truwell, and we're I guess our major point, quite frankly, our major point of difference is with the other wellbeing programs is that we then offer these redemptive remedial exercises. Each the teacher's lasting about half an hour with the student, because their attention span is not quite so strong. So that's about
the teachers or the students. I find teachers' attention span very low.
Well, I know, it does vary, but I write content. Now, I do the content stuff, and Adam said the very kind things about content. And I'm a writer. I do that. I write books and these sorts of things. I enjoy writing and I enjoy the research. I do not do buttons. Just mostly don't do buttons. As you may have gathered when we tried to start this whole webinar and podcast, you know, I was totally lost. Adam does buttons. He is an absolute technical wizard, and so in ed tech startups, and he'll take my boring, prosaic, didactic stuff and turn it into this amazing interactive exercise with the cartoons jumping out, and which grabs the attentions of the students. Particularly important that, but also we obviously with a little bit more sophistication with the teachers, and that's really what the Truwell program is about, Joe.
Yeah. So I warned Tim and Adam that I might be a devil's advocate at some stage, and so I did think of something, because this is something that I think about, right? Is the workload thing, and academics are the same. So I'm not, it's not just a teach thing, but it's academics as well. In that, lots of professions have really big workloads, so it's not just teachers that would get to work at 7:30 a.m. or 8 a.m. and work through till 4 or 5, right? And then maybe do a bit of work at home. They're definitely not the only ones. And compared to some professions, then their start wage is quite good. There's a ceiling, I think, that is not necessarily in other professions, but in terms of your starting wage, it's not a bad starting wage. So that's what, when teachers talk about workload, and even academics, it just makes me wonder whether that's the actual issue or not, or whether that's a mask for a greater issue around. Well, my theory is that it's actually about the value of that workload. So say a lawyer could work really long hours, but their workload is there's a value in that as a profession. And so do you think, and you could tell me you think, no, it is workload if you like. So is the workload a problem, or is it something else?
Well, I'll have a crack at it, and then I'll be very interested in Adam's views on this. Joe, I think it is a workload issue. Unquestionably, from the teachers that I speak with, they are often caught between rising expectations in terms of deliverables and declining resources. And it is unquestionably, from my research, a workload issue. But you are totally right in that annex to that problem are a range of others. And this includes, for example, a lack of affirmation and encouragement from leadership. Most teachers that I know are total gold, and they'll walk on broken glass, they'll go the extra mile, they will work themselves to the bone. But if they are appreciated and encouraged. But if that encouragement comes neither from the students themselves, and they are a primary and a very important source of encouragement, and it doesn't come from colleagues and school leadership, they are going to become cynical and burnt out, and the sorts of things that Adam described. So I think that there are a range of issues. And of course, with the COVID issue on top of that, Joe, where they've been asked essentially to deliver lessons digitally as well as face-to-face, and then to flip from one to the other, and then to help them catch up because they've missed problems with teaching is that everyone's an expert, everyone's been to school, everyone knows and sees and reckons they understand what a good teacher is. And this can also lead to unrealistic expectations being made of teachers. The other thing is, of course, that I think parenting styles, I think we're finding more and more underparented children, and we're finding more and more overparented children. We're finding heavily aspirational parents, and it's not just tiger mum, alligators. So it's a combination of all those things, I think, Joe. Adam, what do you think?
The way I see it is, there's lots of changes. The government's wanting to do lots of things. There's wellbeing, there's literacy, there's numeracy, there's all these adjustments, and they're happy to make all these announcements. But teachers are left with the inadequacy of the systems and processes. Let's talk about student wellbeing just on that, and so schools are now have quotas for student wellbeing. The responsibility of partial care has significantly increased on teachers, yet the training, they haven't received any training. They're having to survey every week. They've got to demonstrate they're doing something with that data, and so unfortunately I think right now there's so many changes that are happening, and the processes and the things out there to support teachers just don't really exist, and so that's why I think the workload is just continually increasing as we.
You're absolutely.
Yeah, so it's kind of not the hours that, because I think when people hear workload, they think about hours, and I think that there would be a lot of parents who would say, well, I work as long hours as you, and yeah, I know you're not just working 9 to 3, but neither am I. Like, so it's not hours, but I think both of you highlight the real issue is the change in teacher work, like what the actual tasks are that they have to do now, the rising expectations from parents. And would you believe that I get calls from parents as well as an academic?
Oh, Joe, great resource.
Can you believe it? So these are adults, and I get calls from the parents. So it's you know, what you're both saying is, I think it's like the expectations on teachers, the change, and that really important teacher voice that you're talking about that seems to be missed by another teacher review.
Yeah, I think you're right, Joe. Look, I think the hours actually is an issue.
Okay.
I'm just going to, and I'll tell you why I think it's an issue.
Yeah.
It's because the hours are not evenly spread out.
Yeah, right.
If you were to actually look at the hours, I totally agree that these are not be all that dissimilar from perhaps other professions. But the reality is that the hours worked during the term time can be absolutely pretty close to manic. And then of course there's the holidays. Of course, people sort of tease teachers about the length of their holiday.
Yeah.
Trust me, they need just to absolutely collapse and to recharge.
Yeah, exactly. If they're not doing work anyway as well.
So that's I think that's what I'd say in relation to the hours issue there, Joe.
I think that's a good point. Yeah, it's like a manic, you know, time, and these kind of really manic times that are hard to, you know, on top of report writing, you've still got to teach the class, you're still dealing with all those things, so there's kind of these intense parts with no support.
Well, I think that's right, and I think one of the reasons why it is manic is exactly as that which Adam pointed out, Joe, because once you would go into a classroom and now and you would teach, and the students will be relatively dutiful and so on. Now, with a range of reasons, we have very, very independently minded children, which is great, may I just say. I think that's fantastic in one sense, but it can be more difficult to manage. And then you have sort of often, you know, the experts in education saying, oh, well, it's not good enough to teach a class. You've actually got to teach each child individually. So you're not preparing one lesson plan. You're actually, in effect, preparing 25.
And you've got to prove that you're doing it as well.
That's right. And Adam, you're spot on. You've then got to, unfortunately, because teaching and training is about 1/6 of the national budget, it's become a big political issue, and so politicians love to fiddle with education, and they arrive bouncing onto the scene with all the breath. They are the great white hope for improving education. You know, I don't know how many education ministers, both state and federal, I've seen, but they all arrive with this breathless sort of proclamation of what they're going to do, and it's the same old, same old, same old. It's all the progress of an Escher staircase. I don't know if you know what those Escher staircases do. You go up them and go nowhere. And the reality is that they think, right, we need to monitor. And we need to have proof points. We need to have action points. We need to have, you know, and so this is what's causing a lot of the problem. It's red tape, bureaucracy, form filling. You've got child safety things. And child safety is vital.
Yes.
Vitally important. But you've got a whole lot of child safety training. You've got safety. You've got CPR, and with a combination of low trust models, of lack of affirmation by school leadership in many cases. Not all, there are many wonderful school leaders, but there's a lot that are pretty average. And indeed, just the nature of of the contemporary child. And as I say, this growing bureaucracy, which is, I think teaching time now, it's about 38%. I saw from one of my research papers, 38% of a teacher's time is actually spent teaching. That's pathetic.
Yeah. All right, we just had a little pause or fix some internet issues, but you know, thank you, Tim. I so agree with everything you were saying about the politicians. It is like another, you know, someone comes in with their big dream and nothing shifts because no one's listening to the teachers, as you guys are saying. But it would be great to hear from your experience, you know, what are the schools that are doing it well? What are they doing? You know, obviously they're using the data that, you know, and you guys are having a great impact. So, you know, what are they doing beyond, obviously you guys are doing more than surveys and you're doing courses with them, but what's making the shift, do you think, with the schools that are having a really good impact in teacher and student wellbeing?
Tim, do you want to take that one first, and then I'll...
Well, I'm aware that I've been speaking a lot already, but
okay.
Give it a go, Adam.
Sure. I mean, well, when I was up in Queensland, I was speaking with Peter, who's the head of secondary there at Livingston Christian College, and the way they were looking at teacher wellbeing was looking at, you know, how many hours it was to do reports, and so really looking at how can we decrease that workload. What can we make? What changes can we make? And so they I think decrease the amount of time it takes to do reports by about 50 to 60% just by switching to software, different software. And so I think, yeah, really capturing that teacher voice and understanding those frustrations that are in the staff room, and then enacting on those. So that's one example that really does stand out for me recently.
I'm going to come in and say the answer is Scotch finger biscuits. Just saying. But you know, it's trivial, but so often it is those attention to those little things. It's the bottle of wine in the pigeonhole and the thank you note. It's a staff party at the end of the year. It is just a little email from you know, the head, deputy head, or head of section, head of department, saying, "Hey, just recognise you guys are going the extra mile." The schools that are doing that sort of thing, and they do it so very, very well. And obviously, to be frank, and without wanting to push things, it's the schools that we're running with Tim and Adam's program of Truwell. This is going to feed into the well-being of students. It's going to feed into the well-being of staff. It's going to feed into the well-being of support staff. Therefore, it's a good word to say that to their students, or indeed their staff. What are they going to hear? They're going to hear, "Hey, the boss cares for me." Yes. The boss, this is probably, Truwell isn't free, just thought I'd mention that. And it's very well.
Nothing good is.
Just say that.
Nothing good is.
Yeah, so don't you, Joe? I mean, you're going to get these amazing, this feedback, this reminder that, hey, the boss actually does care. He's put in this program in place. It doesn't just monitor, it asks for our ideas, and it has these redemptive exercises that we can do in our own time. So, you know, it's not adding to the burden, as it were. They are pretty engaging. And in fact, the teacher exercises can count towards the mandated hours of staff professional development. So it's actually can help them to build up their hours, their voluntary hours of voluntary professional development in that space. So, yeah, that's what I think probably needs to happen in schools, Joe.
Yeah. So what are the sort of things that you would ask teachers to look at in their wellbeing? Because it sounds like it's not just about, you know, it's not just what leadership can do, but from the sound of it, that there's things that teachers can do as well. So what are the sort of things that you would ask teachers to reflect on and, shift? Because I think there's always this level of personal responsibility as well. So what can kind of teachers do to shift some of that, to help, to empower them to, shift and, contribute to their own positive well-being?
Adam?
Yeah, okay. I mean, our courses are designed to be very reflective. I mean, there is quite a bit of content there, but they do allow teachers to take a step back, and instead of, doing things for students, doing things that are about the school and the student outcomes, and just taking a step back to think about themselves and think about how they can look after themselves and what makes life enjoyable for them. Because I think that's really important, that mindset, shifting that mindset, and just going through those reflective exercises. And we're really focused on making those courses very easy to complete. I mean, I've got a 2-year-old, almost a 2-year-old, her birthday's on Friday, and a 4-year-old. So for me to read, say, 3,000 words on positive psychology and for that to be an impact is really hard. I don't really get a lot of free time. And so it's the courses we've designed, so that teachers can go through the courses and find that time to write reflective things in our for the questions, and just to take that step back and have a look at what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's quite right, Adam. I think, Joe, if teachers, you're right. I mean, we as educators have got to assume, you're spot on, we've got to assume some responsibility. And we've actually got to say, look, where are we now? How am I feeling physically, intellectually, emotionally, socially, spiritually? These are all the components. How am I going in these areas? And it's important to actually do a reflection which is holistic. It's not just workload, it is well-being, all sorts of things. We cover this course in Truwell. And I think having done that audit to then say, well, where am I traveling well, and where do I need to improve, and so on, and then what am I going to do about it? What are the redemptive exercises, and what are the initiatives I can take? And these are all the steps that we lead teachers and indeed students through with the Truwell program. But you're right. In the end, Joe, you're spot on. Essentially, well-being is something that an individual needs to get for themselves and need to craft their own path. But they can partner with us at Truwell in that adventure.
And I think because that's one of the things that I found last year when I started to look after my own health, is that once I got that sorted, once I got my physical and my mental health sorted, and I have a coach too, Adam, that has made, the world of difference, is that then you're more clear to know what the issues are at work that you can then address in a more constructive way. So it's not saying all the fault is over here, but if you can take some steps to get, yourself sorted, then you're more able to advocate and see clearly, okay, well, what is going on in this environment? What can I ask leadership for? And what are the steps we can take as a, whole school community to, better our teacher and student well-being? So I get that you're not going to solve the problems just by solving your own health. But then you're able to more identify, well, okay, this is what's actually going on, and how can we address it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. The other thing I just want to add is that I've taught at schools where teacher wellbeing, or a program for teacher wellbeing, is a luxury that is either too costly or just something that's not really a focus area. And we deliberately crafted Truwell in such a way that if a school purchases our student wellbeing program, they get a teacher wellbeing program. And so really focusing on that impact and ensuring that if schools are really interested in student wellbeing and getting the best student wellbeing program, well, guess what? They get the teacher wellbeing program as part of that, because we think that it needs to change. We can't keep on having this as here's the program for teachers, here's the program for students, and most schools aren't really going to get the teacher one, but that and bridging them together. Teachers and students spend an awful lot of time together, and the emotions, the attitude, they do impact each other, and students that see their teacher burnt out, their teacher tired. The students see that, and that impacts on student well-being, and we've got to just get past this idea that they're separate. They are connected.
100% agree.
It's taking a long time for people to understand that connection.
Are there certain demographics or areas that you have found, I'm just kind of thinking about your point about affordability and who can access these sorts of programs, but I'm wondering whether there is actually a demographic kind of indication here about where schools are, which schools need to focus on teacher wellbeing, or is it more about culture and leadership, or combination? Like, which are the sort of schools that really need this help? Is there a...
Well, Joe, great question. The bottom line is that all sorts of schools, be they high SES, low SES, Catholic, independent or state, issues of well-being are to be found in all of them. One of the things, the research that Adam and I have done is that tragically, however, there is usually an underestimation by school leadership of stress levels in the teachers in their own schools, and this is common in all school levels. High, well-known household name type independent schools, right the way through to heroic state schools, out, single class schools or single teacher schools out west, and it's right the way through. One of the things that we do to sort of help, firstly, we've deliberately priced Truwell to make it really accessible. In fact, I would say, Adam, I'd be interested. I think more than half of those that have bought Truwell are state schools at the moment, which is great.
That's right.
And because it's only, the top price at the moment is $10 per student. We do it on the basis of the numbers of students in the school, Joe. And we know that with all the other wellbeing programs that schools typically buy, they end up, the average is spending $37 per student on the various wellbeing programs for teachers and support staff and students and this, that, the other.
Support staff generally don't have programs.
Well, that's right. And so we cover all that, and we actually do it in a much more redemptive way. Just at the moment for about $10 a head, and so that gives us a greater reach. And although that does mean that it's going to be some time before I can choose what coral skirted islands I can buy, we do have the amazing satisfaction of actually getting a better reach. And indeed, we've had some great take up of Truwell in all sorts of schools.
And a number of the programs that just have surveys, and as we've mentioned, monitoring is really important, but you need to have that protection and that enrichment element, are just a little bit cheaper than Truwell. So I won't mention their names, but we think surveys, our survey for students, for example, is 50 cents. The average price is $5. And every school that's looked at our student wellbeing survey has decided to go with the entire platform because they just see enormous value. The other thing we've really focused on is assisting school leaders with implementing best practices really quickly. So we've had over 100 schools sign up, and from that we've been able to see how schools are using it. And there was an issue with a number of schools not sending out the courses to teachers, and that's because generally speaking, programs, it's a jigsaw puzzle, and so there's not this comprehensive wellbeing approach. And so over the last month or so, we have upgraded the platform to run fully autonomously for leaders. So sending is they don't send surveys out. They say, we're going to send out surveys this time because there's no exam, there's no reports. And then guess what? The survey will be sent out. The program, the course, each term, one course will be sent out without the school leadership having to do anything. And they can go through the results as well. So allowing and simplifying the school leadership team to implement the best practices without having to spend hours of trying to understand what this platform is trying to get us to do. Just taking 80% of that control and just saying, we've got it covered. It's just going to run autonomously for you. And we think that's quite important. Yeah.
So behind such, passionate projects such as this, and I, you made a joke there, Tim, but I can see from both of you that you both have a passion. You made a joke about money, and I was like, it's obviously not about that for either of you. You both want to have a huge impact. And behind these stories are always, a personal journey that has led you here to teacher health. So I'd love to hear that, a bit about, from both of you, what has led you to be so passionate about really addressing this problem in such a holistic way?
Well, I'll have a crack at it, and Adam, I think, is probably more eloquent in this space because he can call upon his own testimony. But for me, I've had the privilege of teaching co-ed schools and teaching in single-sex schools. I've had teaching experience in state schools as well as independent schools, and I guess one of the things that I found in all of my research and for the research in my various books and so on, is that the return on investment, the ROI on investing in the well-being of both students and teachers early and doing it deliberately and in a well-targeted manner yields massive dividends. I've had the tragedy of having I've had students who have left my school and they haven't had that support structure that they enjoyed at school, and some have taken their own life. And that is absolutely shattering. I've had teachers, particularly in my very early days, teaching who have taken their own lives because they've had issues that they haven't been able to handle. And this for me, I found pretty shattering. And I resolved that both as an educational leader and then post a headship that I would continue to work in that space to prevent as much from this from happening again. You might remember Stuart Kelly, the brother who took his own life, whose brother, of course, was also killed by a coward's punch, which led to the lockdown issues at King's Cross and the lockdown laws. Stuart was a student of mine. I was only looking at a photograph of him last night, of him hugging me. I was in my doctoral gowns on the headmaster's balcony there at King's, and there is a life gone. There is a life gone, Joe. And so that's what energizes me in this space. I don't want that to happen. I don't want teachers to engage in harm. I don't want my students to engage in acts of self-harm. I don't want underperformance in either by teachers and students. And I do want our educational sector to flourish. I don't see this actually being massively impacted and helped by various government initiatives thus far. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of money being thrown around, not much of it well targeted. And I think a simple approach like Truwell is the answer, or at least is part of the answer that we need to see in our schools, together with really strong, empathetic leadership. We need that empathetic leadership, that human element, that human voice in leadership, which I think is beginning to disappear as various agencies are preferring bureaucratic type leaders and transactional leaders rather than relational leaders. And I think that that's potentially going to give us a major problem in the educational sector in our land.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful, Tim.
Yeah.
So two things really keep me going, and that is my own experience and many new teachers that really do struggle. They just don't have the skills or haven't done any training apart from maybe watching The Lion King one or two too many times, to protect their well-being, and that's something that needs to change, and that's why I'm really passionate about Truwell. The other thing is this impact the actual content needs to have. We've seen a number of programs out there that are focused on the content, and while the content is essential, if it's not in a format that is easy for teachers and students to digest, then it's not going to actually cause change. It's not going to provide any impact, and that's what we're really focused on. It's something that we're really passionate about. We've built our own learning platform for K-12 schools in Australia. We aren't using corporate software. We're really going, how can we make this more engaging? How can we ensure that our teachers will be able to listen and understand some of this stuff about positive psychology or students? And that's something that's really missing as well, is this approach that, is this going to be impactful? Is this going to be something that is going to be more than ticking a box? And that's really something that Tim and I are really passionate about as well, is that ticking a box. That's very important, but that impact and ensuring that brings out change.
Yeah. And I can hear that those early years for you teaching, Adam, were not what you wanted them to be, and that you want to ensure that the teachers that are starting now will have that support. And so what does that look like then, if we'll end on this kind of vision? If we have teachers and students who where their wellbeing needs are being addressed, like what's then the impact, or what does Australia look like then if we have well teachers and well students?
Well, it is a great question. I think that we need to recognise that if government wants to impact upon the cultures and the values of our land, if government wants to be a major agent in shaping the wisdom that there is in the land, then they essentially have two major instruments at their disposal. One is the media. And I would have to say that the evidence is that the government is entirely squandering that massive power that they have in their hands. For example, pornography is now free and unfettered, impacting and infecting society to a level that's led to people like Chanel Contos having to raise petitions to get schools to teach in the area of sexual consent. I might just say that's one of the courses that Adam and I have put together for Truwell for our students. In fact, we've made that particular one free because we feel so passionately that it needs to be accessed. But government is generally being very disappointing in its failure to use media well for the promotion of appropriate values, values which are worthy of the human condition. The second instrument that government has are schools. And in this particular area too, I'd have to say that government performance, both state and federal levels, has been disappointing. It specialises in putting committees together, but it often has a Dead Sea anchor of a variety of people with vested interests, be it unions, be it those who basically want to do things that are politically popular and expedient, short-term issues rather than long-term fixes. And the result is that we continue to limp along, and despite the government coming out with reorganising and we're doing this and restructuring this, we've just had, for example, an effort to restructure or some suggestions of how we're going to restructure the national curriculum. And quite frankly, that collective exasperated sigh that you heard around the nation when that was was all the teachers saying, same old,
No, not again. Leave me alone. That's what I thought. Leave me alone. We've changed our course at ACU so many times. Leave us alone.
Politicization of it, and it just leads to a massive cynicism. So government needs to lift its game, as in dramatically lift its game in both those areas.
Yeah.
Because if failure to do so will condemn Australia to being just another continued slide down the PISA program for international student attainment listings. So we do need to look very seriously at programs like Truwell and ways and means whereby we can lift performance in our schools.
By looking after the teaching, the well-being of, you know, one of our greatest professions, really, and who has one of the biggest impacts in society. So, oh my gosh, Adam and Tim, this has been such a great discussion. I really appreciate you both coming on the podcast and sharing your extraordinary work. And yes, definitely let's continue this conversation and continue to have an impact in these areas that we're all of us are really passionate about. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jo. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. This has been another episode of Teaching Heroes, and I'll see you all next week for another episode. Bye.